Tell me where my daughter is, and then you can ask me anything you want. Mason Reed said it through the glass wall of interview room 3, his voice low, tired, and steady. He had been sitting in the same metal chair for almost 40 minutes, still wearing the rain-darkened work jacket he had worn to the worst first date of his life. Across the hall, 9-year-old Grace sat beneath a humming fluorescent light with her knees pulled close and a crushed blue paper airplane held against her chest. She was trying not to cry. That mattered more to Mason than the officer standing beside him, the missing security device, or the woman in the charcoal coat who had just walked into the station with half the city's corporate world following behind her. Claire Bennett stopped when she saw him. 2 hours earlier, she had known Mason as a name on a dating profile, a single father with an ordinary job and a smile that looked uncomfortable in photographs. Now he was being held as a possible thief. Russell Crane stepped in beside her, smooth as ever, his silver tie still perfectly straight despite the rain. "Claire, don't let one terrible date damage your judgment," he said quietly. This man had access, motive, and the technical knowledge to take the device. Mason looked through the glass, but not at Russell. His eyes stayed on Grace. "She shouldn't be here," he told the officer. "Call her grandmother. The number's in my phone." "Mr. Reed," the officer said, "we need to know what happened at the cafe. And I'll tell you, after my kid is somewhere warm. There are people who talk about family when it makes them look good, and then there are people who remember it when their own life is falling apart." Mason was the second kind. Claire noticed that, though she didn't want to. She had spent years learning not to confuse calm voices with honest ones. Her former fiancé had lied to her with perfect manners. Russell leaned closer. "We should leave this to security." Claire ignored him and walked toward the evidence counter. A clear plastic bag rested beneath the desk lamp. Inside were Mason's wallet, keys, a small screwdriver, 3 folded receipts, and a white pharmacy box with Grace's name printed across the label. "That's everything?" Claire asked. The officer nodded. "Everything from his pockets and jacket. No black security drive?" "No, ma'am." Russell's expression barely moved, but Claire saw his jaw tighten. Only for a second. She turned back toward Mason. Rainwater still clung to his hair. One cuff of his jacket was frayed, and there was a faint red mark across his wrist where his tool bag had rubbed during a long shift. He did not look like a man waiting for a powerful woman to rescue him. He looked like a father counting the feet between himself and his frightened child. Grace finally looked up and saw Claire. "My dad didn't take your thing," she said. Russell gave a patient sigh. "Sweetheart, adults are handling this." Grace pressed the paper airplane tighter. "Then maybe the adults should look harder. I'll be honest, children can say in 8 words what grown people spend years avoiding." Claire reached for the evidence bag, studying every item again. The missing device wasn't there. Neither was any tool large enough to remove it from its protective clip. Behind her, Russell was already speaking about company risk, public image, and legal exposure. Claire barely heard him. Her attention had moved to the pharmacy box. Mason had not been carrying stolen data when police stopped him. He had been carrying his daughter's inhaler refill. And somewhere between the glass-walled cafe and this cold station, the real security device had disappeared. 2 hours earlier, Mason had almost turned the truck around before he reached the cafe. Grace sat beside him in the passenger seat, folding a sheet of blue construction paper against her knee while rain tapped softly across the windshield. "You are driving too slow," she said. "I am driving the speed limit. You have been at the same red light twice." Mason glanced at her. "That is not possible. It is when you circle the block." She gave him the look Rachel used to give him when he was pretending not to be nervous. Mason tightened one hand around the steering wheel. He had spent most of the day checking smoke detectors in a 12-story office building, and his work shirt still carried the faint smell of dust and machine oil. The sitter had canceled 20 minutes before the date. He had already sent Claire a message saying he understood if she wanted to reschedule. Her reply had been short. "Bring your daughter. We can keep it casual." That sounded polite. It did not sound warm. "We can still go home," Mason said. Grace made another fold. "You promised to try." "I promised to have coffee." "That is trying for you." By the time they entered the glass-roofed cafe, Claire Bennett was already seated near the window. She wore a charcoal coat, a cream blouse, and the kind of watch Mason only saw behind locked display cases. Her phone rested beside a cup she had not touched. She looked up when Mason approached, then glanced at Grace. Just once. It was quick, but Mason caught it. Surprise first, then caution. Claire, he asked. Mason. She stood and offered her hand. Her grip was firm. I thought your daughter might sit at another table. Grace looked at the empty chair. I can hear really well from another table. Mason closed his eyes for half a second. Grace. What? I am being honest. Claire almost smiled, though she covered it by reaching for her coffee. Mason pulled out a chair for Grace at the table beside them, less than 6 feet away, then handed her $5 for hot chocolate. No marshmallows before dinner, he said. That rule feels personal. Mason sat across from Claire. For the first minute, the conversation moved like a shopping cart with one bad wheel. Claire asked what he did for work. Mason explained that he inspected fire alarms, emergency doors, and building access systems. He asked about her job. She said she worked in urban technology without mentioning that her name was printed across half the company's buildings. Do you like it? He asked. Claire seemed surprised by the question. I am good at it. That was not what I asked. She looked at him for a long moment. Most men Mason's age would have rushed to fill the silence. He did not. Grace appeared beside the table holding her blue paper airplane. Do you hate kids? She asked Claire. Or do you just not know what to say to them? Grace, Mason said, his face warming. Claire stared at the child, then gave a small laugh that sounded as if it had surprised her too. I do not hate kids. I am not very practiced. Grace placed the airplane beside Claire's untouched cup. You can practice with me. Outside, across the street, a black sedan idled beneath a row of wet maple trees. Russell Crane sat behind the tinted glass, watching the three of them through the rain. A message lit his phone. Claire is in position. Russell looked toward the office tower across from the cafe, checked the time, and typed back 3 words. Begin the test. The first warning came from across the street, a sharp electronic tone that slipped through the cafe glass and made half the room turn toward the office tower. A red light began flashing near the building entrance. Then another. Mason stopped in the middle of a sentence. That is not a fire alarm, he said. Claire looked toward the windows. How can you tell? The pattern is wrong. Before she could ask what that meant, the lights inside the cafe blinked once, twice, then went out. The espresso machine fell silent. Someone near the counter dropped a spoon. Chairs scraped across the floor as people stood too quickly and began asking questions no one could answer. Grace, Mason called. I am here, she answered from the next table. Her voice was small, but steady. A figure moved behind Claire in the dark and brushed hard against her shoulder. She lost her balance. Mason reached across the table and caught her before she struck the glass divider. His hand closed around her forearm while his other arm moved toward Grace. Stay where you are, sweetheart. I cannot see. Keep talking to me. Claire steadied herself against Mason's shoulder. She could feel how carefully he held her, firm enough to stop her fall, loose enough to let go the moment she found her footing. There was no hesitation in him, no performance, just a man doing 3 things at once because 2 people near him needed help. Are you hurt? He asked. No, Grace. Still here. A narrow beam of white light moved through the darkness. Russell's voice followed it. Claire. He came between the tables with his phone held out like a flashlight. Are you all right? I am fine, she said. Mason released her immediately. Russell stepped closer and placed one hand near the back of Claire's chair. We need to get you outside. Mason looked toward the tower. Not yet. The cafe doors may be tied to the same access system. I think we can manage without a contractor's opinion, Russell said. His tone was pleasant. That made the insult worse. Then the emergency lights came on, washing the room in a dim yellow glow. Grace was crouched beside her chair. Near her shoe sat a small black object no bigger than a thumb. She picked it up before anyone noticed. Russell glanced down at the same moment. His eyes met hers. He smiled. Did you drop something? Grace closed her fingers around it. Just my paper. She slid the object into the open fold of her blue airplane and pressed the paper flat against her knee. Across the room, a man lowered his phone after taking a photograph. In the image, Mason's arm was still around Claire, her face turned toward his chest, Russell standing only a few feet away. It looked more personal than it had been. Claire reached for her handbag. The clasp was open. She searched the inside once, then again, faster this time. What is it? Russell asked. Claire's face changed. My security drive. Mason watched her check the side pocket, the small inner pouch, then the floor beneath the table. When did you last have it? Before the lights went out, Russell looked at Mason. Not directly at first. He looked at Mason's work jacket, his tool bag, and the old company patch sewn above the pocket. Then he lifted his eyes. That device has access credentials for several Bennett systems. Mason understood the accusation before Russell said another word. So did Claire. Grace stood beside her chair, clutching the paper airplane against her sweater. Outside, the red lights across the street kept flashing through the rain. Russell turned toward the cafe manager. "Lock the doors," he said calmly. "No one leaves until we find it." The cafe manager hesitated with one hand over the lock. "Sir, I cannot keep people here against their will." "Then ask them to stay," Russell said. "This involves protected company property." His voice was calm, almost helpful, but Mason noticed where his eyes went next. Not to Claire, not to the open bag, to the cameras mounted above the counter. "Grace, come stand by me," Mason said. She walked over with the blue paper airplane tucked against her side. Russell turned toward Mason's tool bag. "You worked on Bennett access systems before, did you not?" Mason looked at him. 3 years ago. At the tower across the street? I inspected the emergency doors and backup controls." Claire folded her arms. "How did you know that?" Russell reached into his coat and pulled out his phone. "Because his name is in the contractor records. Mason Reed, former field technician. Several late payments. One suspended account last year." Mason's face stayed still, but Grace looked up at him. "What account?" "Nothing you need to worry about," he said. Russell gave Claire a careful look. He had the skills, the access history, and a reason to need money. "My reason for being here was coffee," Mason said. "With your chief executive officer?" "I did not know who she was." Russell almost smiled. "That is convenient." The cafe had gone quiet enough for everyone to hear. A few customers held their phones at chest level. Mason could feel the story being built around him, one neat piece at a time. Poor man. Technical background. Expensive device missing. Powerful woman nearby. People like simple answers, especially when the simple answer already looks guilty. Claire watched Mason. "Did you ever have access to my company's internal system?" "Not the internal network. Only building controls during inspections." "Could you copy credentials from a device like mine?" "If someone gave me enough time and the right equipment." Russell spread one hand. "There it is." Mason turned to Claire. "You asked if I could. You did not ask if I did." Before she answered, a patrol officer entered through the front door. Russell had already called ahead. He stepped forward with a polished explanation about stolen data, corporate risk, and Mason's previous work history. Grace moved closer to her father. "Dad." Mason crouched until they were eye level. "You did nothing wrong." "I know. Keep the airplane with you." She nodded. The officer asked Mason to open his tool bag. He did. Inside were a voltage tester, wire labels, 2 screwdrivers, a flashlight, work gloves, and a sandwich wrapped in wax paper. No security drive. Russell's expression did not change. "Check his jacket." Mason removed it and handed it over. Claire looked toward the wet windows, then back at Russell. "How did you know where I was tonight?" The question landed softly, but Russell paused. "Your assistant mentioned the reservation." "My assistant did not know the location." "Then the service must have confirmed it." Claire pulled out her phone and opened the matchmaking application. Her profile showed Mason's name, the cafe address, and a confirmation time of 6:30. Below it was a security notice she had never seen before. Profile match manually updated. She tapped the details. The change had been made the night before from an internal Bennett network address. Mason watched her face. "Someone chose me," he said. Claire looked up. "Yes." Russell spoke quickly. "That proves nothing. It could be a system error." Grace stared at him. "Then why were you outside before the lights went out?" Russell turned toward her. "I was not." Grace held the paper airplane tighter. "I saw your car through the window." The officer looked from Russell to Claire. For the first time, the story no longer pointed in only one direction. Then Russell's phone buzzed. He read the message, slipped the screen face down, and said, "Officer, I believe Mr. Reed should be taken in before more company data disappears." Mason spent another hour answering the same questions in different ways. Where had he been before the cafe? Who knew about the date? Why had he worked on Bennett systems 3 years earlier? He answered each one calmly, even when Russell stood near the door pretending not to listen. Grace had been picked up by Mason's mother-in-law, Carol, but not before she pressed the blue paper airplane into his hand and whispered, "Do not let them throw it away." He tucked it inside his jacket without looking at it. By the time the police released him, the rain had slowed to a cold mist. No charges had been filed, but that did not mean the damage was finished. His phone showed 7 missed calls. The first was from his supervisor. The second was from the licensing office. The rest were numbers he did not recognize. He listened to the supervisor's message in the parking lot. "Mason, I need you to stay home tomorrow. Bennett filed a security concern, and the city contractor board wants a review. I am sorry. I really am." Mason stood beside his truck with one hand on the wet door handle. He had expected anger. What came instead was exhaustion. Quiet, heavy exhaustion. When he reached the apartment, Grace was asleep on the couch beneath Rachel's old quilt. Carol sat at the kitchen table with the rent notice in front of her. "She tried to stay awake," Carol said. "Did they charge you?" "No, will they?" "I do not know." He looked at the unopened envelope beside the microwave. Red letters showed through the window. "Final reminder." Carol followed his eyes. "You can bring Grace to my place for a while." Mason shook his head. "She has school here. I am not trying to take her." "I know." He sat down and rubbed both hands over his face. On the counter, Grace's backpack had a broken strap. Mason found his sewing kit in the junk drawer and began pushing a needle through the thick blue fabric. It was easier than talking. "You do not have to fix everything tonight," Carol said. Mason pulled the thread tight. "This one I can." Across town, Claire sat alone in a conference room on the 26th floor of Bennett Urban Systems. Her coat was folded over a chair. Her coffee had gone cold. On the wall, security footage from the cafe played without sound. She watched Mason enter with Grace. She watched him place his daughter at the next table. She watched Russell's sedan arrive 11 minutes before the power failure. Then she watched the lights go out. The screen turned gray for 12 seconds. When the image returned, Mason was holding Claire upright, and Russell was standing behind her chair. Claire rewound the footage. Again. She slowed it frame by frame. Just before the blackout, Russell's hand moved toward her open handbag. "Find me the original file," she told the technician beside her. He typed for several seconds, then stopped. "This is the original." "No, it is missing 12 seconds. The system log says the camera lost power." Claire looked at the emergency clock in the corner of the image. It had kept running. The camera did not lose power. The technician's face tightened. Then someone deleted that section. Claire opened the internal access record. The deletion had been authorized 23 minutes after Mason was taken to the station. The account belonged to Russell Crane. Before she could copy the file, the screen went black. A message appeared. "Video unavailable." Claire stared at the empty wall as her phone began to ring. Russell's name filled the screen. Claire let Russell's call ring until the screen went dark. Then she looked at the technician. "Do not touch that computer." "I was not planning to." "Good. Photograph the error message, write down the time, and send both to my personal attorney, not company legal." The technician nodded, suddenly careful with his hands. Across town, morning came gray and cold. Mason had slept for less than 3 hours on the couch, still wearing yesterday's shirt. Grace stood at the kitchen table, trying to repair her paper airplane with clear tape. "It will not fly right anymore," she said. Mason poured cereal into 2 chipped bowls. "Some things do not need to fly forever." That sounds like something adults say when they do not know how to fix paper. He almost smiled. Then the airplane slipped from her fingers and opened along the center fold. A small black drive dropped onto the table and clicked against the wood. Mason froze. Grace looked at it, then at him. "That is the thing I found." "Where?" "Under the table when the lights went out." "Why did you put it in there?" The man with the silver tie asked if I dropped something. Mason set the milk down slowly. "Russell?" She nodded. He looked nervous. Mason did not plug the drive into his laptop. He did not even pick it up with his bare hands. Instead, he pulled a clean sandwich bag from the drawer, used 2 paper towels to lift it, and sealed it inside. "Are we in trouble again?" Grace asked. "No." Mason looked at the rent notice near the microwave, then at his silent phone. "We are going to do this the right way." He called Bennett Urban Systems and asked for Claire's office. Her assistant refused to transfer him. Mason tried again. "Tell Ms. Bennett her missing device was found inside my daughter's paper airplane. Tell her I have not opened it." The line went quiet. 3 minutes later, Claire called back herself. "Where are you?" she asked. "At home. Do not bring it to the main office." "I was not going to. There is a law firm on West 9th Street. I will meet you there." Mason glanced at Grace. I am bringing my daughter. Of course. They left 20 minutes later in Mason's old truck. Grace held the sealed bag inside a small lunch cooler because Mason did not want it sliding around the cab. The city streets were wet, and traffic moved slowly beneath low clouds. 2 blocks from the law office, red and blue lights appeared in Mason's mirror. He pulled over. Grace looked at him. Did you drive too fast? No. An officer approached the window and asked Mason to step out. We received a report that you are transporting stolen corporate data. Mason looked toward the law office, less than a quarter-mile away. Claire's car was parked near the entrance. The owner of the device is waiting for me there, he said. The officer shook his head. You can explain that downtown. At the same moment, 30 floors above the city, Russell entered the Bennett boardroom and placed a folder at every seat. Claire Bennett has allowed a personal situation to compromise company security, he told the directors. For the protection of this organization, I am calling for an immediate vote to suspend her authority. Claire was halfway to the boardroom when her phone rang. The call came from the law office first, then from an unknown number. She answered the second one. Ms. Bennett, this is Officer Daniels. We have Mason Reed in custody with a device registered to your company. Claire stopped in the middle of the hallway. Through the glass doors ahead, she could see Russell standing at the end of the long table, speaking to the board as if the room already belonged to him. He was bringing it to me, she said. I can confirm that. Then we need you at the station. Her assistant stepped closer. The vote starts in 5 minutes. Claire looked through the glass again. Russell opened a folder and slid a photograph across the table. The cafe, Mason holding her in the dark. One frozen moment, stripped of everything that came before it. Tell the board I will be late, Claire said. Her assistant stared at her. If you leave now, Russell may have the votes. Then let him count them without me. The police station was 12 minutes away. Claire made it in 9. Mason sat in the same metal chair, but Grace was beside him now, wrapped in his work jacket. The sealed device rested on the desk between 2 officers. Claire walked in without Russell, without security, and without the careful distance she usually carried into every room. Release him, she said. Officer Daniels raised a hand. We still need a statement. You will have one. Start with mine. Mason looked at her. You should be at your board meeting. I know. They can remove you. I know that too. Grace watched them both. Then why are you here? Claire looked at the child, then at Mason. Because your father told the truth before anyone gave him a reason to believe it would help. The officer removed the hold after Claire signed a formal statement confirming the handoff. Mason stood, but he did not smile or offer thanks. You did not save me, he said quietly. Claire's expression tightened. I did not say I did. Good. You corrected something your company helped cause. For a moment, the room went still. Most people around Claire softened their words because of her title. Mason did not. Strange as it was, she respected him more for that. She picked up the sealed bag. Can you tell what is on it? Not here. Why not? Because if Russell is involved, company systems may be compromised. Grace tugged Mason's sleeve. Dad, the lights at the cafe went out before the red alarm across the street stopped. Mason looked down at her, then back at Claire. The tower log should show whether the access readers were running on backup power. Claire nodded. They do. And if someone used my old credentials during the outage, the timestamps should match the backup cycle. Could that prove they were copied? It could prove they were impossible. Claire's phone buzzed. A message from her assistant filled the screen. The board has begun voting. For directors support suspension. 2 are undecided. Claire held the phone out to Mason. He read it and handed it back. Go, he said. I will take Grace home. Claire shook her head. No. I need you to look at the technical logs. You need a licensed examiner. I need someone who knows what the numbers are supposed to look like. Mason glanced at Grace. She nodded before he could answer. Grandma can pick me up, she said. Also, I want my airplane back when this is over. Claire looked at the sealed device, then at the child. You have my word. 20 minutes later, Mason sat in a secure conference room at Bennett Urban Systems while Claire stood beside him. The logs rolled across the screen. He studied them in silence, then pointed to one line. There. Claire leaned closer. What am I looking at? An access confirmation at 6:42. That is when the cafe went dark. Mason nodded. And the tower's backup reader did not come online until 6:44. That entry could not have been created at 6:42. Claire felt the room narrow around her. So someone added it later. Yes. Using your name. Yes. Her phone buzzed again. This time the message came from Russell. The vote will be final in 10 minutes. Claire locked the screen. Mason looked at her. You still have time. She picked up the sealed drive. Then let us stop asking for it. Claire entered the boardroom with Mason beside her and the sealed device in her hand. Russell stopped speaking, but only for a moment. Then he smiled as if their arrival proved his point. There she is, he said. And she brought the man at the center of the security breach. 12 directors sat around the long walnut table. On the wall behind Russell was the photograph from the cafe, Mason holding Claire during the blackout. It looked close. It looked suspicious. It looked nothing like the truth. You have 4 minutes before the vote closes, Russell said. Claire placed the sealed bag on the table. Then stopped the clock. You do not have that authority while under review. I am still Chief Executive Officer until the vote is complete. Her voice was calm now, not cold. Certain. Mason stayed near the door. He had no suit, no polished shoes, and no reason to enjoy being watched by people who had already decided what kind of man he was. Russell pointed toward the photograph. Mr. Reed used a personal connection to gain access to you. He had the technical background to copy credentials, and stolen company data was found in his possession. Mason looked at the picture. Show what happened 12 seconds earlier. Russell's smile thinned. The camera lost power. No, Claire said. The footage was deleted after Mason was taken to the station. The deletion came from your account. A director near the window leaned forward. Russell folded his hands. My account was used by several members of the security team. Claire connected her laptop to the screen. The cafe footage appeared. This time, it began before the blackout. Russell's sedan arrived across the street. He entered after the alarm started. Just before the lights failed, his hand moved toward Claire's bag. Then the image skipped. When it returned, Mason was helping her stand. Convenient editing, Russell said. Mason stepped closer to the screen. Now show the tower access log. Claire opened the file. Mason pointed to the timestamp. This entry says my old credential opened a service door at 6:42. The backup reader did not receive power until 6:44. A dead reader cannot approve a badge. One of the directors frowned. So the entry was added later? Yes, Mason said. Someone wanted my name in the system. Russell looked toward Claire. He could have altered that log himself. Claire lifted the sealed drive. He never opened this. My attorney documented the handoff. She passed it to an independent technician waiting near the wall. The technician connected it to an isolated computer. Files appeared across the screen. Contracts. Payment records. Access reports. 3 shell companies shared the same mailing address. Russell's private office suite. The room changed then. Not loudly. People simply stopped looking at Mason and began looking at Russell. Russell stood. Those files could have been planted. Grace's voice came from the doorway. Carol stood behind her, one hand on the child's shoulder. Grace held the blue paper airplane. That is the ring, she said, pointing at the paused cafe image. In the glass behind Claire's chair, a silver ring reflected beside the open handbag. Russell wore the same ring on his right hand. She is a child, Russell said. She is observant, Mason replied. There is a difference. The technician opened an audio file. Russell's voice filled the room, discussing false alarms, inflated repair contracts, and the need to place blame on a former contractor. No one interrupted it. Claire waited until the recording ended. The suspension vote is canceled, she said. Russell Crane is removed from all company systems, effective immediately. Every contract tied to these companies will be turned over to federal investigators. Russell looked around the table, but no one met his eyes. Mason checked the time on the wall clock. Grace had a school music program in less than an hour. Claire noticed. You should go, she said. Mason picked up Grace's coat. You have a company to repair. Claire looked at the paper airplane in Grace's hand. Would it be all right if I came with you? Grace smiled and pulled an extra ticket from her pocket. I brought one because Dad always forgets to hope. 3 weeks later, the rain had finally moved east, leaving the city bright, cold, and washed clean. Bennett Urban Systems had restored Mason's license, paid the wages he had lost, and cleared his name with every contractor who had received Russell's report. Claire also created an independent safety office that allowed field workers to report problems without asking permission from the executives above them. Mason accepted a position as a technical advisor, but only after reading every page of the offer. No overnight travel during the school week, he said. Claire sat across from him in her office, trying not to smile. That is already included. And I leave by 5 on the days Grace has something at school. Also included. Mason closed the folder. You planned for me to argue. I am learning. On Saturday morning, Claire returned to the glass-roofed cafe. There were no assistants behind her, no driver waiting at the curb, and no board members calling for an update. She wore jeans, a dark sweater, and a coat that did not look like it belonged in a magazine. She arrived 15 minutes early and chose the same table by the window. The repaired blue paper airplane rested beside the sugar jar. Grace had given it to her after the school program, saying important things should not be hidden in desk drawers. Mason walked in carrying 3 cups of hot chocolate. Grace followed with a plate of cinnamon rolls balanced carefully in both hands. You came early, Mason said. Claire looked at the clock. I was nervous. Chief executive officers get nervous? Grace asked as she climbed into her chair. More often than they admit. Mason placed 1 cup in front of Claire. No marshmallows. Claire looked at him. That feels personal. Grace laughed so hard she nearly dropped her napkin. For a while, they talked about ordinary things. Grace's science project. Mason's truck making a strange noise. Claire's complete inability to cook rice without burning the bottom of the pot. Nothing needed to be proven. No one was being tested. That was new for Claire. After a quiet moment, she touched the edge of the paper airplane. The first time we sat here, I thought you were a mistake in the system. Mason looked through the glass at people crossing the wet sidewalk. The system was wrong about plenty of things. Was it wrong about us? He did not answer quickly. Mason was not a man who made promises because a moment felt warm. He had learned that trust was built in small pieces, usually when nobody was watching. I think, he said, we should have another cup of coffee before we decide what us means. Claire nodded. That sounds fair. Grace pushed the 3rd chair closer to the table. You both make simple things take forever. Mason smiled. Claire did too. In the weeks that followed, she came to school concerts without checking her phone. Mason brought soup when she worked late, but never stayed unless invited. Grace taught Claire how to fold paper airplanes, and Claire taught Grace that powerful women could admit when they were lonely. They did not become a perfect family overnight. Real families rarely begin that way. They begin with someone showing up again, then again, until the empty chair no longer feels empty. And maybe that is the lesson worth carrying with us. People are often judged by their clothes, their jobs, their money, or one photograph taken at the wrong moment. But character is usually found in quieter places. It is in the father who protects his child before defending his name, the woman who chooses truth even when it costs her power, and the child who sees what adults are too proud to notice. A good life is not built by finding flawless people. It is built by choosing honest ones, listening before judging, and leaving room at the table for someone who may have spent years believing they did not belong.